I need you to stay with me for the next few minutes because what I'm about to share is something most people in your situation never get told directly. And the reason they never get told is not because it isn't known. It's because it's uncomfortable. It challenges a story that feels safer to hold on to. And it requires you to look at something you've probably been trying very hard not to look at too closely. But you're here, which tells me something about you already. It tells me that some part of you is ready. Some part of you is done pretending that what happened to you was ordinary, or that the confusion you're still carrying is just weakness, or that the person who caused it was simply flawed in the normal human way that everyone is flawed. Because they weren't, and you already know that. You've known it for a while. You just haven't had the right words for it yet. So let's start here. There is a moment that everyone who has truly been through this knows. You don't need me to paint it in detail. If you've lived it, it already lives somewhere inside you. The moment something quietly shifted. Not with any announcement, not dramatically. Just a small internal change, like a room that had been dark for so long you'd forgotten what light even felt like. And then one day, without quite knowing how it happened, there was light. You stopped reacting the way you always had. You stopped apologizing for things that were never your fault. You stopped making yourself smaller so that someone else could feel bigger. And in that stillness, in that hard-won quiet, something that had always been there but never fully visible finally came into focus. Your own ground, your own worth, your own unmoving self. And then they noticed the person who had built their entire relationship with you on the assumption that you would always be available to be moved, destabilized, doubted, and slowly dismantled looked at you and found something they didn't expect. Something steady, something that couldn't be reached the way it used to be reached, something they could no longer control. And what happened inside them in that moment is exactly what we're going to talk about today. Because what a narcissist does when they truly realize that you are no longer theirs to manipulate is something most people never see coming. Even people who have studied this. Even people who thought they knew every move in the playbook. Because the final move they make doesn't look like what you'd expect. It doesn't arrive with the familiar cruelty. It arrives dressed in something far more dangerous. And if you don't know it's coming, it will catch you completely off guard, even now, even after everything you have already been through. Let me take you back to the beginning of this particular chapter, because something important happens before the final move begins. There comes a point for anyone genuinely entangled with a narcissist when something inside them exhausts itself. Not in the way of giving up, in the way of waking up. You reach the floor of the pain. You sit there long enough that the floor starts to feel familiar. And slowly, from that place of complete depletion, something in you reorganizes. The part of you that spent years trying to be enough, trying to understand them, trying to fix what was never fixable, that part gets tired in a way that eventually becomes wisdom. You stop trying to decode their moods. You stop rehearsing arguments at 3 a.m. You stop waiting for the apology that was never going to arrive. And that stopping, that quiet withdrawal of your energy from the cycle is the most powerful thing you have ever done. Even if it felt like numbness at the time, even if it felt like nothing, even if it felt like loss. But here is what you didn't fully see in that moment. They felt it immediately. Narcissists are exquisitely attuned to one thing and one thing only: the emotional energy of the people around them. They may appear completely oblivious to your pain. They may seem entirely indifferent to your needs. But they are not oblivious to your attention. They are not indifferent to your focus. They are deeply sensitive, not emotionally, but strategically, to the presence or absence of your engagement. And when your engagement begins to withdraw, when the desperate edge in your voice disappears, when you stop chasing and stop explaining and stop making yourself perpetually available to the chaos, they feel it like a shift in atmospheric pressure, like the air changing just before a storm. And it unsettles them in ways they cannot fully name even to themselves. Because you were never just a person to them. You were a resource, a mirror, a source of the validation and attention that their fragile internal world depends on to function. And that resource was now quietly and calmly and irreversibly withdrawing. So they began to watch you from a new distance, searching for the crack in the armor, the thread they could still pull. And when they couldn't find one, when the usual tools failed one after another, when guilt landed flat, when silence no longer brought you back, when provocation stopped provoking, something shifted in them, something colder, something more deliberate, something that most conversations about narcissism never quite reach. And this is where the final tactic begins. The final tactic does not look like what you would expect. It does not arrive with the drama and cruelty of the earlier cycles you lived through. It doesn't look like rage or cold calculated punishment or the devaluation you already know how to recognize. It is far more subtle, far more sophisticated. And because it comes dressed in something that looks almost like genuine change, almost like growth, almost like the person you always needed them to become, it is the most dangerous move they will ever make. What the narcissist does when they finally accept that their usual tools have failed is this. They perform a transformation, not a real one, a performed one. They construct with remarkable precision the exact version of themselves that you always needed them to be, the version that would have kept you, the version you grieved the loss of more times than you can count. They appear to become reflective, remorseful, self-aware, and they bring this new version forward with a softness and a sincerity that feels, against all your hard-won logic, completely real. This is what's known in psychology as the Hoover maneuver, but at its most sophisticated level. And what makes this different from the earlier attempts to pull you back, the texts, the grand gestures, the return to love bombing, is the depth and the precision of the performance. In earlier cycles, they came back with affection and attention. Now they come back with apparent growth. Because they have been watching you. They have paid attention to your evolution, your language, your boundaries, the specific things that finally pushed you beyond the point of return. And they have built a response so carefully calibrated to your specific psychology that it can feel, even to someone who knows better, like a genuine miracle. They will say things that sound like the words of someone who has done real inner work. They will acknowledge specific hurts using your own language. They will create a space that feels safe, deliberately, strategically, artfully safe. Because they know from intimate knowledge of you that safety is what you have always most deeply needed. And they are going to offer you a replica of that safety, so convincing that every part of you that still carries love for who they could have been will lean forward and whisper, maybe this time. This is the trick. This is the last dirty trick. And the hardest thing I need you to hear about it is this. It works when it works not because you are weak, but because you are human. Because you have a heart that genuinely wanted repair. Because you carry within you a real and beautiful capacity for hope, for belief in people's ability to change. And they are using that against you. They have always used it against you. But now they are using it with a precision they have never brought to bear before. Because some part of them understands that this is the last move. That if this doesn't work, you are genuinely gone. And so they bring everything they have. To understand why they do this, you have to look at what is happening inside them. Not with the compassion that excuses behavior, but with the clear-eyed understanding that protects you. When a narcissist loses their hold on someone they once controlled, they experience something that functions for them like an identity crisis. Because you were part of the architecture of their self-concept. Your attention, your admiration, your fear, your devotion, these were load-bearing walls in the structure of their fragile inner world. And when you withdrew, when you became strong enough to live without the turbulence they created, you didn't just leave a relationship. You destabilized an entire internal ecosystem. Their grandiosity requires an audience. Their sense of superiority requires people beneath them. And you, by healing, by growing, by quietly and powerfully refusing to participate anymore, removed all of that. You became evidence of something they genuinely cannot afford to believe. That they are not as powerful as they think. That someone can outgrow them and become more in their absence than they ever were inside the relationship. This is not merely uncomfortable for a narcissist. This is existentially threatening. It touches the deepest wound in their entire psychological structure, the terror that underneath all the performance and the construction they are ordinary, breakable, beatable. And you, by walking away with your dignity, proved it. So the final tactic is not simply about getting you back. It is about restoring their internal equilibrium. It is about reestablishing, at least to themselves, that they still have power over you, that you are still reachable. Now here is where it becomes even more important to pay close attention. Because after the initial performance, after the carefully calibrated softness and the apparent growth, there will almost always come a second phase. And this is where the mask begins to develop fractures if you are watching carefully enough. Because genuine transformation sustains itself indefinitely. A performance, no matter how polished, cannot. At some point, the effort required to maintain the act exceeds what they are willing or able to invest. And when you don't capitulate quickly enough, when your strength holds, when you respond with warmth but without surrender, the pressure builds behind the mask. And then you start to see it, small things first. A flash of impatience when you don't respond the way they hoped. A subtle shift in tone when you hold a boundary. A moment where the old patterns surface, dressed in new language, but recognizable if you know what you're looking for. And then comes the reframe. This is the part I most need you to be prepared for. They will begin to suggest, gently but unmistakably, that your caution is the problem. That your inability to simply believe in their change is evidence of your damage rather than theirs. The accountability they initially performed begins to redirect itself back onto you. Your strength becomes rigidity in their framing. Your clarity becomes fear. Your refusal to immediately trust becomes a wound you need to heal rather than a wisdom you have earned. And they will do this so smoothly, so seemingly with concern for your well-being, that it can feel like they are trying to help you even as they are systematically dismantling the very foundation of the strength that freed you. Do not let them redefine your strength as your pathology. This is the absolute center of the final trick. Because if they can convince you that your clarity is actually damage, if they can take your hard-won awareness and transform it into evidence of brokenness, they have achieved something extraordinary. They have used your healing against you. They have weaponized your growth. And you will find yourself in the unthinkable position of explaining your own sanity to the person who tried to take it from you. There is one more layer to understand, and it operates almost entirely below conscious awareness. It has to do with how intimately they know your wounds specifically. The narcissist who has been close to you over a significant period of time does not know you the way someone who genuinely loves you knows you. They know your vulnerabilities. They know the precise shape of the love you always wanted, the exact words that move you, the specific places where you are still tender and unhealed. This knowledge was gathered not out of love, but out of utility. And now, in this final move, it becomes their most precise instrument. When they say the right thing at the right moment, in the right tone, and it lands exactly where you are still most open, you must understand that this is not emotional attunement. This is not genuine seeing. This is strategic knowledge being deployed. The intimacy you shared, the vulnerability you offered, all of it became information. And information in the hands of someone who cannot love without controlling becomes a weapon. So when their approach echoes your own deepest language back to you, when you feel that uncanny sense of finally being truly seen by them, what you're actually experiencing is your own soul being mirrored back at you. Not their love, yourself reflected. And the feeling of being known that arises in that moment is real. It is just not coming from them. The answer to all of this is not rage or revenge or a dramatic confrontation. Those things feel satisfying in imagination and are almost always counterproductive in reality. Confrontation gives them something to engage with. Drama gives them energy. Even anger, however completely justified, is still engagement. The answer is something far quieter and far more devastating to a narcissist than any emotional display could ever be. It is discernment without performance. The capacity to hold your ground so naturally and so effortlessly that it doesn't even look like holding ground. It simply looks like being who you are. Because what a narcissist truly cannot tolerate is not anger, not rejection, not even distance. What they truly cannot tolerate is irrelevance. What finally breaks their hold completely is not when you fight them, but when they simply cease to be the organizing force of your emotional life. When their presence no longer creates a weather system inside you. When you can hear from them, encounter them, have a brief interaction, and return to your own stillness as naturally as deep water returns to calm after something disturbs its surface. That stillness is not a strategy. It is the genuine inheritance of everything you have been through and survived and transformed. When you recognize this final trick for what it is, not in theory but in real time, something remarkable happens. The recognition itself changes the entire experience. Instead of being pulled under, you find yourself watching from a different place. Not coldly, not without feeling, but with a clarity that is almost like seeing in a new dimension. You see the move, you see the fear beneath the move, you see the wound beneath the fear, and you see perhaps for the first time with complete and unobstructed clarity that none of this was ever really about you. The way they treated you was never a reflection of your worth. It was always and only a reflection of their limitations, their inability to genuinely connect, their terror of being ordinary. Their incapacity for the kind of real mutual vulnerable love that you were always fully capable of giving and that they were never capable of receiving. You did not become strong because it was easy. You became strong because you had no other choice but to feel everything, carry everything, understand everything, and keep moving forward anyway. The strength you have now is not the absence of pain. It is pain that was metabolized into clarity, into wisdom. into the specific and irreplaceable knowing that comes only from having been through something that tried to take everything from you and failed. The final trick was designed to pull you back from the threshold of the life that is waiting for you. A version of your life not organized around surviving someone else's instability. A version of yourself that does not need to be strong in the defensive armored sense, but is simply, naturally, quietly whole. And something in you already knows, not just intellectually, but in the place below all the words, that going back would be a betrayal of yourself that no love story, however beautiful it once felt, is worth. You are still here, still awake, still present, still becoming. And that is not a small thing. That is everything. If something in this conversation named what you couldn't name, if it saw what felt unseen, subscribe and stay, because there is so much more of this waiting for you every single week. Content that takes you seriously. Content that gives you the precise psychological understanding you need not just to survive what happened, but to fully move beyond it. The final trick already failed. You already know that. And that quiet, unshakable private knowledge is exactly what they were most afraid of. It is the thing they deployed everything they had to prevent. And the fact that you are here, listening, breathing clear, means it didn't work. It means it never really had a chance. It means that something in you, even at your lowest point, was always more powerful than everything they could bring against it. And that something is still here, still present, still becoming more than they ever imagined you could be.